So you're thinking about getting a budgie. There's lots of things to consider. One of the things to consider is, are you prepared to have a bird in your home? If this is the first time you've ever owned a bird, you may not realize what you're getting into. You may have been watching the YouTube videos and seeing all these cute little birds doing tricks and talking. Well, that's not what you're buying at the pet store. First of all, the birds you buy at the pet store are not trained. They're not tame. They haven't bonded with you or built any sort of relationship with you. So when you buy a bird at the pet store, when you bring that budgie home, it's not going to be doing tricks for you, and it's not going to be talking. It probably won't even want you to pick it up or touch it, and will be actually afraid if you put your hand in its cage or even come close to its cage. So that's something to be aware of, that it's going to take time and effort to develop a bond and relationship with your new pet before you can hope to start training it to do those cute tricks or training it to talk. Also be aware that not every budgie, even though they are parrots, will learn to speak. Budgies are capable of human speech, of mimicking or learning words, but not every budgie wants to. And if your budgie decides it's not interested in learning how to talk, it's not going to. There's no way to force a budgie to learn something like that. So you have to accept the fact that your budgie may never speak. They may never carry on a conversation or say those cute little phrases that you've heard on YouTube. So keep that in mind when deciding whether a budgie is the right type of pet for you. Another thing that you want to consider is the mess. Having a pet bird is very messy. We're not just talking about having to clean up bird poop, which, as anyone who owns a bird will tell you, there's a lot of it, and we'll talk about cleaning cages in another video. But it's also the mess that they create with their food and even with their feathers. So budgies, like most parrots, eat their seeds in their shells. That is, when they are fed seeds, those seeds are still in shells, and they'll actually use their beaks to crack open those shells and drop the husks, the shells themselves, back into their food bowl or onto the floor. Well, seed husks are very lightweight, so even a slight breeze, like the breeze created by a budgie flapping its wings in their cage, is enough to blow those seed husks out of the cage and onto your floor. Added to that, budgies have a rather endearing habit of actually throwing their food out of their food bowls and onto your floor. If your budgie decides that it wants to play with its food rather than eat it, be prepared. There will be beakfuls of seed going flying across your room. Another aspect that creates mess with budgies is their feathers. When your budgie molts, which happens several times a year, their downy feathers, their light white downy feathers that are underneath their top feathers, their colored feathers, they end up shedding those. It's similar to a cat or a dog who is shedding hair, only these are very light feathers that end up blowing everywhere. And in my home, you will find feathers, when my birds are molting, you will find feathers in every single corner of my home. Even though the birds are only in one room, those feathers carry in the slightest breezes. Just by me walking across a room, those feathers will be blown into other areas of my home. So you're going to have to be prepared to do a lot of vacuuming and a lot of sweeping to keep on top of that mess. So it's something to consider, both in terms of, are you really ready to have a pet bird, but also where are you going to be putting that cage. Speaking of where you're going to put your cage, that brings up the important subject of, where do you put a cage? Ideally, you want a cage to be somewhere where you're going to be spending time. Budgies are social. They want to interact with you. They want to be with you. So you don't want to have your budgies in a room that nobody goes into or they only seldom go into. You want your budgies somewhere where they're going to have human interaction on a regular basis. So you'll need to keep that in mind in terms of deciding where you want to put your cage. You also need to keep in mind that a cage should never be located where there might be a draft. So near doorways or near windows. Budgies are very susceptible to drafts, and it can actually make them ill. You also wouldn't want your budgie in a high traffic area where there are people constantly going past their cage. It could cause stress for your budgies. You need to find an area that isn't a main thoroughfare, that isn't somewhere where people are constantly walking past, but still somewhere where people are going to be present and going to be with them. Lastly, you never want to put any type of bird cage near your kitchen. Many of the cooking fumes that we take for granted, such as non-stick Teflon pans, can actually be deadly for your birds. So you want to make sure that when you're locating your cage, it's away from your kitchen. You never want it anywhere near there, and when your birds are out of their cage, you don't want them in your kitchen when you're cooking, if at all possible, for the same reasons, both because of the fumes, but also if you're dealing with hot stoves and ovens, it's a safety hazard for your bird. The last thing you might want to consider is the noise level. Birds can be very noisy. Budgies and parrots in particular can be quite noisy. Many people think of budgies, because they are a smaller bird, as being a quieter bird, and it is true that they maybe aren't quite as loud as, say, a macaw parrot would be with their very high, loud screams and calls, but budgies are still very noisy birds. You can hear my budgies in the background getting a little worked up and excited, and this is actually pretty quiet for them. Luckily for me, my budgies are often about this volume, but they can get really noisy at times, to the point where they can easily drown out a conversation that you're talking with somebody. You almost feel like you're having to yell over the birds to hear each other. So you need to be prepared for that. Are you really ready to have that kind of constant noise in your life? If you're not sure about that, a good way to maybe find that out would be to go onto YouTube. There's a lot of videos on there that are just budgie sounds, bird sounds. Maybe try playing one of those for a few hours while you go about your regular business of living, and just see whether it's a noise you feel that you could actually have in your life and not find it driving you up the wall. Having a bird isn't for everybody, so you want to find that out before you spend the money and buy yourself a budgie. A lot of people think of budgies as being great starter birds because they are relatively inexpensive, especially when compared to other parrots. And it is true, budgies are not that expensive to buy in a pet store or from a breeder when you compare them to the hundreds or even thousands of dollars you might spend on a larger breed of parrot. But the cost doesn't end with buying your budgie. So before you actually commit to buying a budgie and bringing it home, you want to sit down and do some calculations and really determine, can you afford to have a budgie? Setting up a cage, buying the perches, the toys, the food dishes, all the other things that you need to have a happy and healthy budgie can be quite expensive. You can easily be looking at several $100s for that initial cost. So you want to really spend some time, do some research, and figure out, is this a cost you can afford to not just buy a budgie, but to buy everything that goes along with it? There are lots of things that you need to know before you get budgies. There's lots of things you need to have on hand and ready to provide them. There's also a lot of things that are not black and white, but a matter of personal choice that you'll need to consider and do research and make the choice that's right for you. One of those decisions that you need to make pretty much right off the bat is, are you getting one budgie or multiple budgies? Now, there are lots of myths out there regarding which is better. Lots of people say you should get one budgie because they're easier to train, that they'll bond with you faster, that they'll be more willing to talk. Well, there is some truth in that, but not a lot. The truth is that not every budgie will talk, that they have to want to do that, and it requires hours and hours of training from you to get them to talk. So having one budgie will not guarantee a talker. It also won't guarantee that your budgie will bond with you. That again requires you putting in the time. One of the things to really keep in mind, though, is the fact that budgies by nature are flock animals. In the wild, they live in huge flocks. So if you're choosing to have only one budgie, you need to keep that in mind and remember that by having only one budgie, you have become that budgie's flock. For your budgie to be happy, to feel comfortable in its environment, and to thrive, you need to spend the time with it. Now, if you're staying at home all day, that's pretty easy to do. But if you're like most of us and you go to school or you have a job, it can be really hard to put that amount of time into spending with your budgie on a daily basis. So if that's your lifestyle, if you are going to school, if you have a job, you might want to think twice about having only one budgie and really think about having two or even more so that your budgie has companionship even when you're not there, so that they feel comfortable in their environment, so that they're not bored. And really, from my own personal point of view, having more than one budgie is a lot of fun. Watching the interactions between budgies is priceless. There really is nothing that can replace that. I personally would never want to have just one budgie, just because it's so much more rewarding to see them behaving naturally, seeing them interacting with their fellow budgies in a way that they would in the wild. Another thing that you really want to spend some time doing research and considering before you buy even is, are you going to have your bird's wings clipped or not? As you do research, you'll discover that this is a very controversial topic with a lot of very strong feelings from a lot of different people. There are many people who very strongly feel that all budgies should have their wings clipped for safety reasons, especially if you're hoping to eventually allow your budgie out of its cage to fly around in your home. Some of the concerns they have are things like windows, mirrors, the possibility of the bird escaping. All of those are very legitimate concerns. But then you have the people who feel very strongly the exact opposite, that no bird's wings should be clipped, that birds were meant to fly, and that if you don't clip your bird's wings, it will learn to deal with the hazards in its environment, that it will learn not to fly into the windows, that it will learn that mirrors are for perching on top of and not flying into. That's not a decision anyone can make for you. That is a decision you need to make for yourself. You need to look at your own circumstances, at your environment, and at what you feel comfortable with. Everyone's circumstances are different. So there isn't really a right or a wrong answer to that question. Should you clip your bird's wings, or should you have your bird fully flighted, that is, without their wings clipped? Is a decision you need to make. A few things to keep in mind, though, is that clipping your bird's wings is an ongoing process. Feathers grow back, so even if you ask the store to clip the bird's wings when you first buy it, or if your bird's wings are already clipped when you first buy it, those wings will grow back. Those feathers will grow back. So if you do decide you want to have your bird's wings clipped, it is something you're going to have to do on an ongoing basis. Either you're going to have to learn to do it yourself, which some people find rather scary, or you're going to have to pay to have someone else do it, a local pet store or a veterinarian. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that clipping your bird's wings will not make your bird tame. It will make your bird more dependent on you, but it won't make it tame. Tame comes with bonding with your bird. That's spending time with it, building a relationship with it, and with training, which again takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. So just because you get your bird's wings clipped does not mean you're going to have a tame budgie. Another thing to really keep in mind is that just because your bird's wings are clipped does not mean it can't escape. A lot of people make that mistake. They think that because their bird's wings are clipped, it's safe for them to have windows open, to have doors open because their bird won't fly. Well, a clipped budgie can still fly. It's not as good at flying. It can't fly as high usually, but it can still fly, and budgies in the wild can fly up to 90 kilometers per hour. That's really fast. So a budgie whose wings are clipped, maybe they can't fly quite that fast, but they can get close to it, and it doesn't take long for even a clipped budgie to be out that window and into a tree. And that can be really hard to retrieve. So just because your bird's wings are clipped does not mean your bird can't escape. You still need to take the same precautions you would if your bird's wings were unclipped if you're going to let your bird out of its cage. So keep that in mind. So I hope that's giving you a little bit to think about in terms of whether a budgie is really the right pet for you. They are very rewarding as pets. They are very entertaining to interact with, to watch. They make great companions. Companion parrots are a commitment, whether you're talking about a great big macaw or a tiny little budgie. So I'm hoping that the information I just gave you will give you a chance to really think about whether this is a pet that you are ready to commit to. Budgies do have long lifespans, so this isn't a pet that you're only going to have for a couple of years. You are looking at quite a number of years that you will have this as a pet. So you want to make sure that, sorry, my budgies are really excited right now. You want to make sure that this is the right pet for you.